Welcome to this week's episode of The Modern Good. I'm your host, Bizzie Gold, and Conscious Construction starts right now. Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of The Modern Good. We are filming live at Spartan Media Fest 2019, sponsored by ATP Science. So thanks to the Spartan World Media Fest for having us here and setting up this awesome podcast opportunity. I have to say, when I saw that this event was coming up, I immediately started thinking about how I was going to reach out to you, Dr. Lara, and I will give her intro in just a moment. We got to meet last year at Media Fest. We got to have dinner together at the sushi restaurant that I was so bummed is now out of business.
I know, it went away.
It's really sad. But I have to say, in my career, especially kind of being in this emerging alternative sector of the mental health industry, it's pretty rare that I meet like-minded psychologists and psychiatrists at this phase of the game. So when we were able to actually sit down and have this conversation, I was immediately so excited. There were a million questions I wanted to ask you, and I think somebody like yourself is such an important thought leader for the conversation that we're going to be having today, because people do look for the credentials and the experience, and I get it. That's important. Right. So you have a really great platform, I think, to help usher us into this next generation. So having said that, let's please welcome Dr. Lara Pence.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here.
She's a licensed clinical psychologist, but she's also many, many other things, including one of the podcast hosts at Spartan Up, and your podcast segment is called
Spartan Mind.
And can you tell us a little bit about what someone would expect to get from that podcast?
Yeah, so it's brief little nuggets, like 3 to 5 minutes, me just riffing basically off of anything that's going to help your mental performance, increase your emotional acuity, like help you move more into your body and less outside of your head sometimes, so that you can actually improve what's going on in your head, to really help people who are looking to increase, yes, their performance out on races, but also much more like in life, because we know that if we're doing well by our mental health, and if we're really centering into the things that are creating struggle for us, that is going to impact our performance out on the race. So we have to dial into that in order to show up in a physical way that's going to kind of benefit us. So a lot of those little nuggets once a week.
That's awesome. And by the way, you guys are going to get plenty of nuggets over the next about 45 minutes to 55 minutes. So I'm really excited. Big nugget. So one of the things that Dr. Lara and I have been talking about is essentially this fracturing and disorganization of mental health as we know it at this current time. Yep. And I think it's a really exciting time. I'm always of the mindset that when things start to fall apart and old structures fall away, even though that inherently comes with disorganization and disorientation for a moment, to me, that's that precipice, right, when things are about to get really good. So Amen. Tell me, what is your take on this phase that we're in, and what aspects are about to emerge or already emerging?
Yeah, so I love that we're having this conversation. First of all, because literally, and I was just telling you this offline, but I just talking to somebody the other day about how just sort of the face of therapy is changing in a lot of ways. There's more telehealth happening right now, where people are not necessarily just going into an office and laying on a couch. They're doing lots of different other things. And I am celebrating this. I think this is amazing. And I love what you said, that sort of like fractures can actually open us up and become more available to alternatives. And in my work, especially, so over the last 10 years, I've worked specifically with individuals with eating disorders. And so in doing that, part of the last 10 years has really sort of been a growth experience for me in understanding and realizing that talk therapy is not always the best modality, especially with individuals who are struggling in their relationship with their body and getting connected to their body. Half the times as a therapist, the typical question you hear is like, right, well, how does that make you feel, right? Yes. But so many people have no idea how to articulate the answer to that question.
Or they're completely disconnected from feeling anything.
That's
and
exactly
it's important to figure out at what moment in time their brain stopped connecting to that area. So.
Exactly right. And so for me, I was lucky enough to actually train in a facility that did alternative things. They did dance movement therapy, and they had yoga, and they did tons of art therapy. And so when I moved into private practice, and I would struggle in the work with my clients and would get to a position where we felt like, or I felt in particularly quite stuck and not kind of knowing what to do. Instead of thinking, well, therapy's not working, my go-to thought was, what do we need to add in that's going to open this person up? What else could we maybe supplement that can get this person in their body that is not talk therapy, right? Mm-hmm. So can I refer them to a dance movement therapist? Can I refer them to a yoga practitioner that's familiar with trauma? Can we bring an art therapist in? And in the beginning, I would say, and this is, just my admission, that my ego was afraid to let go. My ego was afraid to say like, oh, this doesn't work. But after a few years of integrating alternative therapies to supplement the work, I started to realize, well, maybe they don't need talk therapy altogether, right? And my ego isn't on the line here. This is this person's mental health. This is this person's well-being. I need to let go of the things that I'm holding on to in order to serve them the best. So then usually I would just refer them out completely. Like, talk therapy right now is not necessarily going to be the right space for you. So let's do this, and then maybe we can come back to talk therapy, or maybe not. And I can tell you that for the most part, the majority of my clients felt like this was such a relief, because I also think that with talk therapy, and it's so funny, another conversation is just coming to my mind that I had yesterday with someone. A lot of people don't know that if it's not working well, that there could be a lot of reasons why it might not be working, right? Mm-hmm. It might not be working because you don't have the right fit for a therapist, but it might not be working because talk therapy might not be working for you. It's not the right thing. And they
might not be asking the correct questions, right, which I think is a huge aspect of what's flawed about talk therapy in general, is right, certain lines of inquiry are they're the wrong lines of inquiry. And I know that we've had this conversation, but so many people essentially have basically subscribe to these false narratives that they've found ways to kind of replicate over time to keep proving the same scientific experiment. Like, see, I always have to be in control, otherwise everyone lets me down, or right, everyone's always going to reject me, right? Whatever these messages are that our brain latches onto. But we're setting up a faulty experiment, and we're actually not even perceiving reality objectively. So when someone says, like, what was that experience like for you? Even the words that are come out of your mouth are completely patterned with this false narrative. So right, we need to get way before that. Right. So it's almost like whatever's happening to you now, like, cool. Also, let's track it back about 32 years.
Right. Yeah.
So I totally, we're on the same page. And I find that, while talk therapy, it can be great to have an outlet to express yourself if you're at home bottling things up and right, you're not in an environment where you can talk to your parents, you don't have a friend that you feel comfortable talking about things to. I feel like it's like a pressure valve. Like, I understand that there's that need to relieve the pressure, but I don't know that with everything we know now, right, with, consciousness expanding and us constantly learning and growing, I don't know that line of questioning is as best we can do right at the current moment.
Well, and I think too, I feel like through my growth as a therapist, I've been able to really see as well that what I bring into the room with my clients is also from my experience. And it's impossible for me to turn that off as a human being. Like, it's impossible, I think, for me to not bring into the room my experience as a therapist, my experience as a human being, my experience as a mother when I'm, working with other mothers, my experience as a woman and a female. It's impossible, I think, for me to turn that off.
Which brings up a really important point, too, because, let's say when we look at, like, ethical standards of how traditional talk therapy is supposed to transpire, right, in air quotes, those things are on that questionable line. Like, how much of your personal experience right, can you bring in? So I think that just shows another, like, to me, great fracture where that's critically important.
Right.
You have to share those things.
Exactly.
Those are the things that you, like, know with every cell of your being. Those are the things you should be teaching.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because in graduate school, I can rewind back to certain classes where we talked about disclosure and, what serves you versus what serves the client. And I went to a very psychoanalytic program. So there was a lot of discussion around that. But, the bend was typically stay away from disclosure. Like, this is not your time. This is the client's time. And over time in my experience, and as I've just sort of grown into myself as a human being, and then also as a therapist, I've really learned the power of disclosure. And I've really learned that more than anything, I think what my clients want to see is another human being across the room.
Yeah, it builds rapport, and then they actually trust you, and you're leading from experience.
That's right, right. And I think, we of course have to be careful. We of course have to be careful. But just as we do in any other relationship, we have to have a certain knowledge of the boundaries that we need when we're relating to somebody, and when those boundaries, when maybe we can be a little bit more vulnerable and a little bit more open, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. But I also think that more than anything, what we need to show up as in the room as a therapist is human. I cry with my clients. To me, that's okay. In the beginning, I remember like when I was in my practicum work as a pre-doctoral student, I worked with very, very ill individuals who just had really horrific stories of trauma. And I remember clear as day sitting with one individual working so hard to not cry, she's sitting there bawling her eyes out, opening up about a trauma. I'm working so hard to not cry
that it almost takes away from you being able to fully experience.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And so I think back those times now, a more experienced therapist, and again, just as sort of a more full human being.
Like embodying your therapy
Right.
practice. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. I love that. So I think, I think some of these fractures and the way that sort of like the model is being disrupted a little bit is an opportunity for us to take a look at, what actually might need to change that really could serve the work, and that we could benefit from in a way that our clients then could fully embrace.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all those things. And I think it is important, just like when we allow ourselves to be authentic and be who we are, it frees other people that might look up to us, and then they're like, oh, well, if they're doing it, fuck it, I'm going to do it too.
Totally.
So I know that there are going to be therapists and social workers that are listening to this now that are like, God, it's an internal struggle that I'm sure they have to deal with pretty frequently. So on the topic of disclosure, because I do think that as we've just been discussing, there are aspects of it that can be very productive. And one of my company's core values is that you can only lead others as far as you've led yourself.
Oh, I love that.
So in embodying that, your ability to disclose with purpose instead of just disclose to dump out onto people it's already there. If you've done that work to understand who you are and what stories are objectively true and what stories have served you up to a certain point no longer serving, you can kind of shed that.
Right.
Then when you disclose, you're disclosing with intention and purpose. You're not just disclosing just to create some sort of like, see, we're both broken.
Right, exactly.
Because that to me, that can get really tricky.
Agreed.
And I think a lot of people unfortunately lean into that on social media.
Right.
Where it's like to try to get people into their audience, they're like constantly leaning into their brokenness.
Yep.
I love to lead with the things that had previously been broken and now have healed. So it's like, hey, let me show you how far you can come and how to walk that path instead of like, we're all fucked up. Yep. You can trust me.
Yeah. And I think what people are, so I also believe that I do think right now, one of the things that I am seeing is just how disconnected we really all are from ourselves, from each other. And we are connected human beings. Like our connective tissue is supposed to be active. And so when it's not, I think we get really sick. And I think we are craving connection more than we ever had before. But what we're trying to do is hot wire it. Like, oh, you wear boots, so do I. We're best friends.
Totally.
And I think that's the same thing with like, in the therapy space, I think sometimes if that disclosure from a therapist's point of view can be utilized to hotwire that connection. And I think that's also where we can go wrong, right? Mm-hmm. Is when we're using information to quickly draw a line between you and me. And then that's where I think we do have to be careful because, somebody might be, let's say, for example, it's a second session I have with a mom. And the first session didn't go very well. Maybe I said something that I could tell she was sort of ruffled with or uncomfortable with. And if I'm feeling, if my ego gets wounded and I'm not really aware of it.
And you need her to like you again.
That's exactly
right.
right.
You throw out the codependency rod. You're like, I need you to like me right now.
That's
Let's
exactly
find one little thing to like.
Yep. And so if she comes in on session number 2, right, and all of a sudden I'm not tuning into myself and I'm trying to hotwire that connection, she could experience it, first of all, as not having space for herself in the room, but also more likely, if she's tuned in any degree, it won't feel authentic.
Totally.
So I think too, we just have to be aware of how we disclose, but also just in general as human beings, how sometimes we move into that position of trying to hotwire that connection, and to recognize and know where that's coming from. It's coming from that place of just wanting to connect, which is a real human need that we all have, which should be satiated. But unfortunately, I think sometimes the way that we go about it moves us more towards disconnection than connection.
On the topic of connection, because I think this is a great segue, and it's so interesting. And to me, it's proof that it's kind of universal truth. A lot of the things that I talk about, even like some of the words and then the segue where I'll go next, it's like already exactly how you talk. So this is great. It makes my job super easy because we're totally in tune.
That's awesome. I love that.
And I'm not hot wiring that.
Amen. Right?
We're actually connected.
Because you can feel, and the energy too, you can feel.
For sure.
If you're tuned in enough to your body, you can sense that.
Totally. So this is something that even I talked to Joe DeSena about yesterday on our little interview. This concept that for us to truly connect with each other and to be a healthy, vital collective, we have to truly know ourselves and our very unique identity, right? That cannot be duplicated and is not like anybody else's.
Right.
So in this way, I gave him the analogy of a clock that has all these different cogs that have to fit together for the clock to tick. And at first glance, they might all look like one another. But when you really look closer, some of them are smaller, some of them have ridges, some of them have, even taller, parts of them. And if we all go around society just trying to be like, oh, I'm going to look like that cog, I'm going to look like that cog, instead of figuring out what our cog looks like, the whole thing breaks down. Yep. And I think that really even speaks to this hot wiring concept that you're talking about, where we're like, you have red shoes, I have red shoes, we're best friends, let's be like each other. When really, I think the deep work that has to be done is for us to figure out what exactly is our piece of the collective that's completely unlike anybody else's, because we can find connection in how our pieces work together, not how they are the same.
Right, exactly. And I think that social media, I'm just going to use this platform as an example, and I'm not a social media basher. I think that there can be great things from social media. But I think sometimes in social media, where people go is this position of like, oh, I like that, I want to be exactly like. And I think we really all need to settle into the idea and the concept of like, we have a unique contribution to make to this universe. And when we close that off, as you said, the whole universe breaks down.
100%. Like the whole universe's success is on your shoulders. So don't fuck this up.
No pressure. But
no pressure, but pressure.
Right. But that's the thing too, right? Like pressure, like
it's a good thing.
That's right.
Pressure and commitment was the next pivot that I wanted to make. So just go. You got this. I don't know.
But I think, in disrupting the model too, it's interesting because I have a panel that I'm on later today where literally the title is Disrupting the Model, and everyone up there is sort of disrupting their own, field a little bit. And I guess the way in which I think about it from this perspective too, from like a therapeutic perspective, is with my clients, I push, I ask for commitment, I ask for dedication, I ask for them to do the work. And I think, and I'm upfront with them from the beginning, like, when I go over, okay, who are you? Let's talk about you for 30 minutes. Now I'm going to tell you about me, just to make sure that you're in the right room, that you're in the right place, that like this feels okay, just from the first session, which sometimes we don't know we will feel until the 6th session. But one of the things that I say is I am an active therapist. I am not going to just sit back and watch this unfold. Like I like to get in there. I like to collaborate. I like to get just as messy as you are going to get. And I think that we do need a push. People need to be pushed into what's uncomfortable, and we need to show up for them and tell them that we think they can, rather than just sort of sit back and like wait for that to happen a little bit. That to me, I think is just, and I think we've sort of gotten away from that a little bit sometimes too.
A little bit.
Okay, good.
No, whoa. Our society has completely backslid.
Yeah, so you tell me.
I think our society right now is built to basically not apply any sort of pressure. Everybody's a winner. Right. We're in this really, to me, crazy social experiment at the current moment, and I don't know which side's going to win. I surely hope it's the side that's kind of more aligned with Spartan ideology, because I think that's the side where our collective becomes a healthy living organism instead of the chaos that I think we're currently experiencing. Because not everybody's a winner, and that's okay.
Yes.
It's okay.
Right.
You need to, and I was talking about this also with Joe yesterday, one of the things that I think is like one of the most critical pieces of parenting is teaching your child how to accurately self-measure.
Yes.
Right? If you don't know what 100% effort is, you're fucked.
Yes.
You will never be competitive if you don't know what 100% is.
That's right.
If I had to rate my parents' parenting, I'd probably give them like a D. But one of the things that they did really well was they taught me how to accurately self-measure and push myself. So
that's awesome.
They got that 1 out of 10.
Right.
Good for them. We'll give you a little round of applause. But on this topic, I think our society needs to get back to this, building of a resilient, vibrant society. Because right now, they've turned us into basically a bunch of people pleasers.
Correct.
That all have this, kind of, amorphous identity where like no one, even down to things which we won't get into too much, but like they're even trying to make us all like each other in terms of gender. Like all of a sudden there's like no differences that can be the same. It's a wild time is what I'm saying. It's wild.
Yes.
So I think pressure is one of the most important things. And I think this is why things like Spartan Race really help people even sort through mental health issues that might have been plaguing them forever. Because if you have this kind of closed container of like, okay, I'm going to commit to this event and I'm going to train for this event, and I'm deathly afraid that I will, die on the course or something will happen to me or I won't finish. But then you cross the finish line. You've now got this closed container of a new scientific experiment that your brain is like, actually, I can fucking do whatever I want.
Amen. Yes.
And we need to be, I think, intentionally curating more of these experiences for society instead of literally preventing them with like gloves from ever bumping up against anything bad.
I couldn't agree more. I love that you use the word container, because it's a word that I think of all the time in the sense that like the therapy space is a container, right? And like you use the word experiment a lot, which I love, and I don't use, but maybe I'm going to steal it and start using it now. But because it is like in that arena, in that container, right? I can create the safety and we've got to do the work together. But they're also like, it's an opportunity for like experiential rewiring, right?
Yes.
Where it's an opportunity for you to experience, you the client, me pushing you in a way that's empathic, right? And compassionate, but also hard for you. But hey, guess what? We're gonna survive.
Yeah.
Like, you're gonna fucking figure it out. It's the same with like the container of Spartan is the same way. Like, you're gonna push yourself, right? You're gonna have competitors and racers next to you. You'll figure it out, right? And then you use these experiences, these mini containers, and you drop that experience into other containers, and that's what builds resiliency. But if in that container, like, you're not putting in the right ingredients, and you're just sort of like, oh, who said it last year? Someone said something brilliant, that even still water begins to smell.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It's, you have to move it, right? Like, you have to push it along. And so I think, and I couldn't agree more that I think we need more of that. Absolutely. We need to take the gloves off. We need to not be afraid of it. We need to embrace it. And when we feel somebody pushing us, to try not to resist, to make yourself available to it so that you can grow.
So on this topic of the experience of being pushed, right, and then people's resistance to it, I do think that simultaneous to this kind of removal of like pressure and commitment, and then this kind of like amorphous identity piece, on top of this, we've also been kind of imbued with just like pervasive victim mentality everywhere, right? Where like, if you're a victim, somehow you now have status and you get to use your victimhood as an excuse to not do certain things. So I think on this particular topic, if somebody's already been imbued with this victim mindset, as soon as someone's like, come on, you can do this, push, they're like, you don't know about my life.
You're triggering
You don't
me.
know about my trauma.
Yes.
Safe space, trigger, right?
Right.
So, and obviously in my personal practice, I have to walk through this line a lot because I deal with trauma all the time.
Exactly.
And we can have compassion and empathy for what somebody's been through and acknowledge how they have, experienced trauma while still showing them that they do not have to only exist in that
That's right.
victim container. Because while they might have been a victim in this container over here, that doesn't mean that that is going to be the rule for their life moving forward. But actually, many of them do allow that to become a rule for their life, and in many cases, allow themselves to become victimized many times over for the rest of their lives.
Right.
But in that whole space, it's like they're very tempted, and I understand it's not to point fingers at the person that's been victimized. They're very quick to shout predator if you try to push them some sort of way.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and I think we've gotten just so lost in that. And I think that the individuals that are doing the pushing have to stay committed to their work, and to not, because certainly, in the work that I've done a lot with eating disorders, just tons of trauma, right? And so a lot of it will come up in our work together. And in the beginning, again, admission, because I think admission allows for growth, and also hopefully the people that are out there. I remember in the beginning, if someone was like, you're really triggering me, that I would just back off, okay, let's switch, let's shift somewhere else. What else, what else is going on for you today? As opposed to in today's work in clients, when there's sort of this, I'm really triggering you, that's when I move forward.
That's the most exciting time.
That's exactly right. Thank you. You have opened a door and I'm going to walk right through it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
You think you're closing the door right now, but actually we're opening it and I'm going to walk through.
Well, and I try to preface all my work with this too, to let people know you will get triggered. And by the way, when you do get triggered, that is the exact sign that we're going in the right direction. And that is your brain's defense and protective mechanism to not solve it.
That's right.
Because your brain is addicted to being in this current space.
That's right.
That is why you're in my office.
That's exactly right.
If you want to get out of my office, which I too want you to get out of my office, you're going to have to work with me through this triggering experience and not make it about me being somehow like a predator.
Right.
Because sometimes, of course, that's going to happen. That's one of their protective mechanisms. This is too much for me.
Yep.
You're pushing me in a way that I don't like to be pushed. It's like, well, you came here to get help, and I'm here to help you.
That's
so
exactly
you might not like me 90% of the time, and I can sit here and be okay with that.
Right, exactly. And let's use this as a corrective experience where you can feel that sensation of being triggered and activated, but then we do something else with it, because what continues to play off of the narrative that you've written for yourself is, if I lean back, then
I get away with it.
That's exactly right. So I think when we move into that position, and again, it's a learning experience for people who are new to the field and coming in, because you do, I think, kind of have to come into it. But I guess what I would encourage people to do is remember again the intention of why you're there. The intention of why you're there as a helper, as a mental health practitioner, whether or not you have letters behind your name or not. If you're a yoga practitioner or whatever it is that you're doing to hold space for somebody else, remember the intention of why you're there. If you're there to just continue their narrative, then you got to think about that. Really, is that really why you're there? ?
Right. Well, and I think in general, not everybody that might actually lead their practice that way is aware that they're leading their practice that way.
Yeah.
So this comes back to being able to be a little bit self-reflective, and it's one of the reasons that I really wanted to have you on the podcast, because I do think there might be a lot of therapists that need to see somebody that's being a bit of a disruptor, so that they can free themselves and be like, fuck, am I just kind of creating this financial codependence where I am just buying into their narrative?
Right.
And one of the ways that I like to think about this is, I remember when I was little, my dad would always talk to me about what he was processing with his therapist. And even at a young age, I'd be like, Dr. Goldberg doesn't know shit about you. You just sit there and lie to him. So he can't even help you because you're just lying to him.
Right.
So like even from a young age, I remember at that moment being like, the therapist can only help you as much as you're accurately self-reporting.
Right.
And the whole system at this point, if you keep doing like kind of towing the traditional line, it's kind of flawed.
Right.
Because you are basically ethically tied to their self-reporting to a degree.
Right. Right.
So I think it's fantastic that you're able to, again, embody your experience, all of the different things that you've done, including being a pivotal part of Spartan. And hopefully give permission to other people that are out there, because this goes out to all the therapists and social workers, literally everybody out there. And I've thankfully had a lot of them come through Break Method that now take Break Method into their practices. I'm actually going to lead a 2-day Break Method workshop in the women's prison in Vermont.
My gosh, that's awesome.
I'm so excited.
That is so great.
It's really exciting.
Oh my goodness.
I'll tell you more about it offline.
Please,
but it's
please.
pretty exciting. So I think it's important for those, that are in these fields out there that up to this point have felt like they've been kind of boxed in or ethically tied to only kind of towing the line. Let this be a bit of a motivation call. We're not going to shift the paradigm if it doesn't start within yourself. So if you have those little murmurings of what's going to come next, like follow Dr. Lara's path.
Well, right. And I think like for me, because I think about my own experience in my practice a lot. It just helps me reflect on where I am today. It helps me pay gratitude for where I am today and the things that have helped and not helped. And I think like I can think of clients in my earlier years as a practitioner that I was trying to be a therapist more than I was actually doing therapy.
Yeah.
And I can think of where I really did not serve that work well, versus more today. And again, like I've had experience, I've come into my own, I'm almost 40 years old. Like, I think that there's wisdom that comes with that too. Not to say that if you're a 20-year-old therapist, you can't kick ass out there, but I think that there is wisdom that comes with experience. But versus today when I'm just myself, like then also sitting in compassion and in containment with an individual and listening wholeheartedly, laughing when it's funny, crying when it's sad, getting mad when we fucking should be. Mm-hmm. That's when brilliance happens. Like that's where the magic happens, is when you are like showing up fully in who you are and not trying to be a therapist, but just, allowing yourself to sit there. And I think this is also why. And I kind of, I have mixed feelings, but I know that my mixed feelings actually come from an ego position more than anything else about, if you look, for example, on Instagram, people are calling themselves mindset coaches and performance coaches and mental health experts without having like the degrees behind their name. Mm-hmm. And initially I would say that like my little like goosebumps went up and my pricklies went up of like, well, they didn't go to grad. Like, who are they to call themselves that? They didn't. Who the fuck cares? If they can do the work and like have some kind of understanding of mental health and what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, good boundaries, not great boundaries, like, I think we just have to embrace again, like that we can have people who are helping other people that didn't go to graduate school for 5 years. And that's okay, to like let that be, because if you're showing up fully in who you are, then I think that can also serve the work really well, as long as you're obviously doing it in like a relatively contained and appropriate way.
Oh, for sure.
But yeah, so that part I think is important too.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And, I think as these kind of emerging pathways of mental health start to come up, I think there will naturally, the response once it kind of explodes is always to kind of recontain again.
Yes, exactly.
So I do think because we are in that disorganization phase right now, it's, you do have some life coaches out there where you're like, should you really be doing this?
Right.
I'm not so sure.
Right.
But at the same time, to each his or her own. And, like you said, as long as you're, I was saying, leading from a place that you've currently led yourself.
Yeah, I love that.
And always be authentic. I've shared a lot about my ups and downs in my life with my clients and in my course. And it's not, I always tell them that I'm simultaneously a student and a teacher always. And I'm never sitting up on some pedestal. Like, I have everything right and you guys have everything wrong.
Right.
Like I still have my own personal struggles, and I use those as like living, breathing examples of how to navigate through them.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So I think as long as you're being authentic and you're continually doing the work yourself and having that self-reflective reflex, that makes for solid gold.
Right. Yeah.
I think.
No, I totally agree. And I do think, you know, we have to like tune in first to ourselves, because before we can ever tune into, you know, anything else. And so it's always like, whenever I hear somebody that's either like doing this kind of work that you and I do, whether they're a therapist or a psychologist or not, but like haven't had their own experience of doing the work with another practitioner of any kind, I'm like, wait, what?
Totally. And it's quite often that I get clients in that went into therapy because they needed to sort their own issues.
Right.
But then in the process of doing this, they didn't sort their issues. They just became a therapist. And then they're coming to me and they're like, here's the thing. I've had a therapy practice for 25 years, but I'm really struggling. Right. I'm like, okay, come on in.
That's awesome.
Because, you know, often we're drawn to the things that we have yet to resolve in
Correct.
ourselves, you know.
Right.
But it's my hope that whoever is out there, you know, trying to walk this path, you need to seek some sort of resolution along the way as you're. It's okay to simultaneously walk the path and try to self-resolve.
Yes.
But you can't just walk the path and be like, I was drawn to this because I was fucked up, but then I just got really focused on this.
Right.
And,
yep.
you know, you have all of these kind of like closet demons that you just keep in the closet and don't sort.
Which, by the way, don't get kept in the closet.
No.
Yes.
Not at all.
Bleed out. Totally.
Yes, they totally bleed out. So where can our listeners find you? And after that, I have like 3 little interview questions that I just want to end the segment with. But where can people find you, and, you know, what is it that you want our listeners to know about your work?
Yeah, so I love that. So easy where to find me. My website's drlarapence.com. Send me an email, lara@drlarapence.com.
And it's Lara.
That's right, Lara. Or you can find me on Instagram at drlarapence.com. What's it called? A handle? Is that what it's called?
Oh my God. Yes, it's a handle.
A handle, yeah.
And it's not drlarapence.com on Instagram.
No,
it's just at drlarapence.
You can tell how expert of a social media person I am.
It's part of what makes you so authentic and
awesome. Lord. And then, okay, so what do I want listeners to take away from this? I think what I guess what I would say is give yourself permission to be, well, first of all, give yourself permission, of course, to be who you are. Like, step into the real you. Know that there is nobody else on the planet, literally nobody else on the planet that can make the contribution that you can make, because nobody else is you. So that more than anything would be what I would want listeners to take away from this. Under the guise of, you know, working with individuals, being a mental health practitioner, again, I would sort of say the same thing. Like, give yourself permission to be who you are and do the work that you want to do in those containers. And, you know, if you found yourself down one path of performing in your practice, if you are performing in your practice, then you're not practicing. You're performing.
Like performing your role.
That's exactly right. You have to settle in, drop into your body, be more connected with yourself. You are not an actor in a room with clients. You are a human being. And remember that you show up with flaws. You show up with stuff in your backpack. You show up with emotions. That's what we are looking for in other individuals. That's how we're looking to connect.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Dr. Lara, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. I'm sure there are a million other topics that are going to come up that I'm going to want to have you back on the show for. But
awesome. It's
been a real pleasure having you on the show, and thank you so much. And listeners, you know that you can check out more content at mymoderngood.com. And again, thank you to Spartan Media Fest, sponsored by ATP Science. This is going to be a wild next 48 hours of podcasting. So thank you, Dr. Lara.
Thank you.
Everybody go check out her stuff. She's pure magic. See you next time. Thanks for checking out this week's episode of The Modern Good. To find out more about Break Method, head to breakmethod.com, and to check out my workshops and public speaking schedule, busygold.com. I'll see you next week.